He thought he could fool an entire room with one whispered lie, but he never expected that the quiet black maid standing beside the bar would become the only person he could trust. The jazz band drifted through the crystal-lit lounge while conversations floated beneath glittering chandeliers, every polished glass reflecting the wealth that filled the exclusive Manhattan rooftop bar. Naomi Carter kept her eyes lowered as she arranged clean glasses behind the service counter, grateful that her evening shift was almost over. 12 hours earlier, she had been scrubbing marble floors inside a luxury apartment building less than 5 blocks away. Her feet ached inside inexpensive black shoes, and the tiny silver watch on her wrist reminded her she still had to catch the last subway home before visiting her mother at the hospital before sunrise. Invisible people survived longer, she often reminded herself. Invisible people finished their work, collected their paycheck, and quietly disappeared before anyone important remembered their face. Then someone gently caught her wrist. The movement wasn't rough or sudden. It was careful, almost deliberate. Naomi turned and found herself looking into the calm blue eyes of a tall man dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His expression never changed, yet something about his stillness made the noisy room seem strangely quiet. He leaned closer, just enough for only her to hear. "From this second on," he whispered, his voice steady as polished steel, "you're my fiancée." Naomi blinked, convinced she had misunderstood. Before she could answer, his hand rested lightly against the small of her back with respectful distance, as though they had rehearsed the gesture 100 times before. Every instinct told her to step away. Every lesson life had taught her warned against becoming involved with wealthy strangers whose lives were wrapped in expensive smiles and dangerous secrets. "Sir," she whispered nervously, "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." "I haven't," he replied without looking at her. "Please trust me for exactly 5 minutes." Her heart pounded. 5 minutes felt longer than an entire lifetime. She followed his gaze across the room. A woman wearing an elegant crimson evening gown had just entered the bar. Diamonds shimmered around her neck as guests greeted her with warm smiles. Yet the man's calm expression hardened ever so slightly. He wasn't looking at her with affection. He was watching her the way someone watched an approaching storm. Naomi noticed another detail. Several distinguished guests subtly shifted their attention toward the entrance at the exact same moment. Conversations softened. Laughter faded. Even the pianist hesitated before touching the next key. Something important was unfolding beneath the polished surface of the glamorous evening, and somehow she had been pulled directly into its center. "Smile," the stranger murmured, his voice barely audible. "If anyone asks, we've been engaged for 3 months." Naomi's pulse raced as confusion battled common sense. She had never met this man before tonight, yet everyone around them suddenly seemed convinced they belonged together. Then one of the bartenders quietly leaned toward another employee and whispered words that sent a chill through Naomi's entire body. "That's Adrian Castellano." She had heard the name only in passing, always spoken softly, always followed by respectful silence. Naomi looked back at the man beside her. Adrian finally met her eyes again, and for the first time, she saw something beneath the confidence. It wasn't fear. It wasn't arrogance. It was urgency. And before she could decide whether to walk away or stay, the woman in the crimson gown began walking directly toward them with a bright smile that somehow made the room feel colder. Naomi forced herself to keep smiling even though every instinct begged her to step away. The elegant woman in the crimson gown approached with effortless confidence, greeting guests by name until her eyes settled on Adrian. For a brief moment, her polished smile hesitated. Then it returned, flawless enough to fool almost anyone. "Adrian," she said warmly, "you arrived earlier than I expected." Adrian answered with the calm composure of a man who had rehearsed every possible conversation long before walking into the room. "Claire, I hope you do not mind. I wanted someone important to meet everyone tonight." He turned slightly toward Naomi. "This is Naomi." Claire's eyes examined Naomi from head to toe, lingering on her simple black work uniform, the white apron still tied neatly around her waist, and the tray she continued holding with both hands. Nothing about Naomi resembled the glamorous guests surrounding them. She looked exactly like what she was, a hard-working woman finishing another exhausting shift. Claire offered a polite smile that never reached her eyes. "How lovely to meet you." Naomi quietly nodded. Nice to meet you too, ma'am. Before another word could be spoken, Adrian gently reached for Naomi's hand. The gesture surprised her so completely that she almost pulled away, but she remembered his quiet request. 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. His hand remained respectful and steady, never squeezing too tightly, never making her feel trapped. It simply looked convincing to everyone watching. Around them, conversations slowly resumed, yet Naomi noticed several guests stealing curious glances in their direction. Claire maintained her graceful posture, but something subtle changed behind her smile. Adrian continued speaking with effortless confidence. Naomi and I have been keeping our relationship private. We preferred peace before sharing the news. The words sounded so natural that even Naomi almost believed them. Claire laughed softly. You certainly know how to surprise people. Life has been full of surprises lately, Adrian answered. His tone remained pleasant, but Naomi sensed layers of meaning she could not yet understand. As servers carried sparkling glasses across the ballroom, and the pianist returned to a gentle melody, Naomi finally noticed the small details she had missed earlier. Two older gentlemen stopped talking the moment Claire approached. A woman near the balcony discreetly checked her phone before looking toward Adrian again. Another guest quietly left the room without finishing his drink. Everyone appeared relaxed, yet the evening felt carefully choreographed, as though each smile concealed another unanswered question. Naomi leaned slightly closer without looking directly at Adrian. I still do not understand why you chose me, he answered without moving his lips enough for anyone else to notice. Because no one expected me to stand beside the only honest person in this room. His answer caught her completely off guard. Honest. He knew nothing about her except that she worked hard for a living. Or perhaps he knew far more than he admitted. Claire excused herself to greet another group of guests, but before leaving, she glanced back one final time. Her expression remained elegant, although the warmth had disappeared entirely. Naomi slowly released the breath she had been holding. Is it over? She whispered. Adrian looked toward the grand windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, where thousands of city lights reflected across the Hudson River. Not even close, he replied quietly. Tonight only looks beautiful because everyone is pretending. The hardest part has not even started yet. Naomi followed his gaze across the glittering room, realizing that beneath the music, the laughter, and the expensive crystal, every person seemed to be playing a role. Somehow, without planning it, she had become part of the most important performance of the evening. The ballroom slowly returned to its elegant rhythm, but Naomi could no longer hear the music the way she had only minutes earlier. Every laugh sounded measured. Every handshake seemed rehearsed. Even the servers she had worked beside all evening suddenly appeared unusually careful, as though they understood invisible rules that she had never been taught. Adrian released her hand only after another group of guests approached to congratulate them. He accepted every polite smile with remarkable ease, introducing Naomi as though she had always belonged at his side. She answered with quiet courtesy, careful not to say more than necessary. She had spent years learning that silence often protected people better than explanations ever could. When the guests finally drifted away, Adrian guided her toward a quieter corner overlooking the city lights. Below them, streams of yellow taxis moved through Manhattan like ribbons of gold beneath the summer sky. Naomi folded her hands together, trying to steady her breathing. You owe me the truth, she said softly. Adrian remained silent for several seconds. His reflection shimmered across the tall glass windows before he finally spoke. 30 minutes before you started your shift, I learned that someone close to me had spent months creating a life that never truly existed. Naomi looked at him without interrupting. I could not confront that person tonight. Too many people were watching. Too many business partners were waiting to see how I would react. If I appeared uncertain, every conversation inside this room would change before sunrise. Naomi frowned. So you chose a complete stranger. Adrian nodded once. A stranger cannot rehearse deception. She almost laughed at the strange logic behind his answer, yet there was something painfully sincere in the way he said it. You looked at everyone else in this room, he continued, but you never looked at what they could give you. You focused on your work. That told me everything I needed to know. Naomi lowered her eyes. No wealthy guest had ever noticed something so ordinary before. Most people barely remembered the names of those who served them. Adrian had noticed far more than she realized. You work 2 jobs, he said quietly. You spend your mornings cleaning apartments and your evenings here. Every Tuesday and Thursday, you stop at St. Catherine Medical Center before going home. Naomi froze. How do you know that? Because I asked questions after I realized I needed someone I could trust. His answer should have frightened her, yet his voice carried no threat, only honesty. Your mother has been receiving physical therapy since her stroke 6 months ago. You have not missed a single visit. Naomi felt emotion tighten her throat. Very few people knew how difficult those months had been. She had sold her car, postponed her community college classes, and worked nearly every weekend simply to keep the medical bills under control. Adrian continued looking out over the skyline. Money can buy influence. It can buy beautiful buildings and expensive dinners. It cannot reveal character. Character only appears when no one important is watching. Naomi studied him differently now. The confident businessman standing beside her no longer seemed untouchable. Beneath the tailored suit and calm expression stood a man carrying responsibilities heavier than anyone in the ballroom could imagine. Before she could answer, Adrian's phone vibrated once. He glanced at the screen, and for the first time that evening, the calm certainty in his face faded ever so slightly. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and quietly said, "Our 5 minutes have turned into something much longer, Naomi. If you walk away now, I will understand. But if you stay beside me until this evening ends, I promise your kindness will never become something I take for granted." Naomi looked at Adrian for a long moment, searching for any sign that this was another carefully planned performance. Instead, she found quiet exhaustion hidden beneath perfect composure. The city lights reflected across the windows behind him, outlining a man who seemed admired by everyone in the room and understood by almost no one. She slowly folded her apron in her hands. "If I stay," she asked softly, "what happens tomorrow?" Adrian answered without hesitation. "Tomorrow you return to your life if that is what you choose. Tonight, I only need someone willing to stand beside me because it is the right thing to do, not because there is something to gain." Naomi wanted to believe him, yet life had taught her that every extraordinary offer usually carried an invisible cost. She thought about her mother sleeping in a hospital room several miles away, about another stack of medical invoices waiting on the kitchen table, and about the community college acceptance letter she had tucked into a drawer because she simply could not afford to attend. Every dream had slowly become another bill she could not pay. Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a simple business card. There was only his name, a phone number, and an address printed in understated black lettering. "If tonight creates difficulties for your job here, my office will make certain you have another opportunity." Naomi accepted the card but did not look at it. "I do not want charity." Adrian gave a faint smile. "Neither would I." He paused before continuing. "I believe honest work deserves honest compensation. I also believe people should never have to choose between caring for family and keeping their dignity." Those words settled into the silence between them. No wealthy guest had ever spoken to Naomi that way before. Most people noticed only the uniform she wore. Adrian seemed determined to notice the person wearing it. Before Naomi could answer, the restaurant manager hurried toward them with an anxious expression. "Mr. Castellano," he said politely, "the board members are ready for the champagne toast. They are waiting for you and your guest." The manager glanced briefly at Naomi, uncertainty flickering across his face before he quickly forced another professional smile. Adrian nodded. "We will be there shortly." As the manager walked away, Naomi quietly asked, "Do they all know who I really am?" Adrian looked across the ballroom where elegantly dressed guests gathered beneath a magnificent crystal chandelier. "Some know exactly who you are. Others only see what they expect to see. That difference tells me more about people than any conversation ever could." Naomi followed his gaze. Expensive watches sparkled beneath soft golden light. Designer gowns brushed across polished hardwood floors. Crystal glasses caught reflections from hundreds of candles. She had spent years cleaning places that looked just like this, always entering through service elevators and leaving through employee exits. Tonight she stood in the center of the room, and every curious glance reminded her that she did not belong. Or at least that was what she had always believed. Adrian extended his arm with calm confidence. "No matter what happens during the next hour, remember one thing. You are not pretending to deserve respect. You already deserve it." Naomi hesitated only a second before gently placing her hand on his arm. They walked together toward the waiting guests. each step carrying them deeper into an evening neither of them could fully predict. As applause began to fill the ballroom, Naomi noticed Claire watching from the opposite side of the room. Her elegant smile remained perfectly composed, but her eyes revealed something entirely different. She was no longer curious. She had started asking questions, and Naomi suddenly realized that the answers might change far more than one extraordinary evening. The soft chime of crystal glasses echoed through the ballroom as guests gathered beneath the towering chandelier. A waiter carefully poured sparkling cider into every flute, while a string quartet replaced the piano with a slow, elegant melody. Adrian stood with effortless confidence beside Naomi, yet she noticed the subtle way he scanned the room before every conversation, as though he were quietly reading emotions instead of faces. One by one, influential business leaders stepped forward to congratulate the couple they believed had been planning a private engagement for months. Naomi smiled politely, repeating simple words of gratitude, while hoping no one would ask questions she could not answer. Surprisingly, Adrian never allowed the conversations to linger long enough for that to happen. He redirected every discussion with calm precision, making everyone feel heard while revealing almost nothing about himself. Naomi began to understand why people listened whenever he spoke. It was never because he raised his voice. It was because every word seemed carefully chosen. As the evening continued, she also noticed something else. Several members of the staff appeared unusually nervous whenever Adrian thanked them personally for their work. A young server accidentally dropped a linen napkin while passing their table. Before the employee could apologize, Adrian simply bent down, picked it up himself, and handed it back with a quiet smile. "Long night?" he asked. The young man nodded, clearly embarrassed. "Yes, sir. Then remember to eat before your shift ends." It was a small moment, almost invisible beneath the glamour surrounding them, but Naomi watched the employee walk away with relief replacing anxiety. That single gesture challenged everything she had assumed about the man standing beside her. Claire observed the exchange from across the room. Her expression remained perfectly graceful, yet she approached moments later carrying 2 glasses with measured elegance. "Congratulations again," she said pleasantly. "I suppose everyone enjoys unexpected announcements." Adrian accepted 1 glass, while Naomi politely declined because she was still working. Claire looked toward Naomi with gentle curiosity. "Tell me, where did the 2 of you first meet?" For the first time all evening, silence settled between them. Naomi felt dozens of nearby conversations quietly fade as people instinctively waited for the answer. Adrian never looked at her. He trusted her to respond. Naomi remembered something her late father had often told her before every school presentation. The truth was always easier to remember than a perfect lie. So she smiled warmly and answered, "We met while I was working. I thought he was just another customer who appreciated kindness more than attention." Adrian turned toward her with genuine surprise. "That is exactly how I remember it too," he said. The tension dissolved into soft laughter from the surrounding guests, who accepted the answer without another question. Claire also smiled, but her eyes lingered on Adrian for a fraction longer than before. She quietly excused herself, disappearing into the crowd with calm composure. Naomi released a slow breath she had been holding. "I almost ruined everything," she whispered. Adrian gently shook his head. "No, you saved it because you answered with honesty instead of performance." Those words settled deeply inside her. Throughout her life, she had believed that powerful people valued perfection above all else. Adrian seemed to value sincerity instead. As applause filled the ballroom for the evening's formal toast, Naomi noticed several guests watching her differently now. They were no longer staring at the maid who happened to be standing beside an influential man. They were beginning to see the woman he had chosen to stand beside him, and somehow that quiet shift in perception felt far more significant than any speech delivered beneath the glittering lights that night. The formal toast ended beneath warm applause, and the ballroom gradually returned to the comfortable rhythm of quiet conversations and gentle music. Guests drifted toward the panoramic terrace where the Manhattan skyline stretched beneath a sky filled with stars and glowing office towers. Naomi finally exhaled, believing the most difficult part of the evening had passed. Adrian looked toward her with an expression that had softened noticeably since they first met only hours earlier. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You did far more than I asked." Naomi smiled faintly. "I only answered questions honestly." Adrian nodded. That is much harder than people realize. Before either of them could say another word, one of Adrian's senior assistants approached carrying a slim leather portfolio. Mr. Castellano, tomorrow's breakfast meeting has been confirmed. The charity board also moved the children's hospital fundraiser to Friday evening. Adrian accepted the folder, glanced through several pages, then closed it without signing anything. Reschedule the breakfast, he replied calmly. The fundraiser stays exactly where it is. The assistant seemed surprised. Several investors may not appreciate the change. Adrian simply answered, children waiting for treatment cannot rearrange their lives around convenient schedules. The assistant quietly nodded and stepped away. Naomi looked at him with genuine curiosity. You support the hospital? Adrian gave a small smile. My grandmother spent her final years there. She always believed that success meant very little if it could not make someone else's burden lighter. Naomi remembered the worn visitor badge folded inside her purse from St. Catherine Medical Center. Every week, she watched families sitting beside loved ones, hoping tomorrow would bring better news than yesterday. For the first time that evening, she found herself speaking naturally instead of cautiously. My mother always tells me that kindness is the only thing people remember after everything else fades. Adrian looked at her for several quiet seconds before answering. I think your mother and my grandmother would have been good friends. The simplicity of his reply made Naomi laugh softly. It was the first genuine laugh she had allowed herself all evening. Adrian noticed it immediately, and something changed in his expression. The careful distance he had maintained since the beginning of the night gave way to something warmer, something quieter. He was no longer studying her because he needed a convincing story. He was simply enjoying her company. As they stepped onto the terrace, a cool breeze carried the sounds of the city far below. Yellow taxis moved through the streets like ribbons of light, and ferries crossed the dark water beyond the skyline. Naomi rested her hands lightly against the balcony railing. It is beautiful up here, she whispered. It is, Adrian agreed. But I rarely stop long enough to notice. She looked toward him. Maybe that is the price of always carrying responsibility. Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked across the city as though searching for a place he had not visited in years. Perhaps, he finally said. Or perhaps I simply forgot that some moments deserve more attention than the next business decision. Neither of them realized Claire had quietly stepped onto the terrace through another entrance. Hidden behind a row of flowering olive trees arranged beside the glass wall, she watched the conversation unfold with thoughtful silence. She no longer appeared disappointed or angry. Instead, she looked like someone who had just discovered an important piece of a puzzle. And as Naomi and Adrian continued talking beneath the lights of New York, neither of them noticed that the evening had quietly shifted from a carefully planned performance into something neither one had expected to feel. The evening slowly drew toward its final hour, yet neither Naomi nor Adrian seemed eager for it to end. Guests began collecting their coats while soft jazz drifted through the rooftop lounge, replacing the formal atmosphere with something quieter and more personal. The staff cleared crystal glasses from white linen tables, and the city beyond the windows shimmered beneath the cool night sky. Naomi quietly untied her apron, preparing to clock out before catching the last subway home. She had almost convinced herself that this extraordinary evening would soon become nothing more than an unbelievable memory. Adrian walked beside her toward the private elevator reserved for departing guests. May I ask you one more favor? He said gently. Naomi looked at him with cautious curiosity. I thought tonight was over. It almost is, he answered. But tomorrow morning the newspapers will begin asking questions. Investors will call. Business partners will want explanations. I would like to avoid turning your life upside down because of one evening. Naomi remained silent, allowing him to continue. Come to my office tomorrow morning, Adrian said. Not because I expect anything from you. I simply want to explain everything properly and make sure your employer understands that none of this was your responsibility. Naomi studied his face. She had spent years learning to recognize false promises. This did not feel like one. It felt like a man trying to protect someone who had unexpectedly helped him carry a burden. I finished cleaning at 11 o'clock, she replied. Then I can come. Adrian smiled with genuine relief. That will be perfect. As they reached the elevator, the doors opened and Claire stepped out. Her elegant red gown still looked flawless, but there was no performance left in her expression. She quietly looked from Adrian to Naomi before speaking. May I borrow Naomi for just a minute? Adrian hesitated, then nodded. Of course. He stepped a respectful distance away, leaving the two women alone beside the glass wall overlooking Manhattan. For several moments, neither woman spoke. Finally, Claire offered a small, surprisingly sincere smile. You have kind eyes, she said. Naomi seemed confused. Thank you. Claire folded her hands together. Do you know why Adrian trusted you tonight? Naomi shook her head. Neither do I, Claire admitted softly. But I know him well enough to recognize something I have never seen before. Naomi waited patiently. Claire looked toward Adrian, who was quietly speaking with one of his assistants across the room. He has spent years surrounding himself with people who admired his success. Tonight, he spent the entire evening listening to someone who expected nothing from him. Naomi lowered her eyes. I never meant to complicate anyone's life. Perhaps, Claire replied. You simplified it. Those unexpected words lingered between them. Claire extended her hand, and Naomi accepted it without hesitation. There was no bitterness in the gesture, only quiet understanding. Take care of yourself, Claire said, and remind Adrian to do the same. He forgets more often than he realizes. Before Naomi could answer, Claire walked away through the lobby, disappearing into the elevator without looking back. Adrian returned moments later. Everything all right? Naomi nodded slowly. Yes, I think we both understood something tonight. Adrian opened the lobby doors for her, allowing the cool New York air to drift inside. As Naomi stepped onto the quiet sidewalk, she looked back one final time. Adrian remained standing beneath the warm lights of the entrance. Watching to make certain, she reached the waiting crosswalk safely before turning away. Neither of them spoke another word, but both carried the unmistakable feeling that their story had quietly moved beyond coincidence and into something neither success nor circumstance could have arranged. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight that reflected from the glass towers of Midtown Manhattan. Naomi finished cleaning the final apartment on her schedule, carefully folded her work gloves into her canvas bag, and boarded the subway toward Adrian's office. The polished skyscraper that carried the Castellano name seemed impossibly distant from the neighborhoods where she spent most of her life, yet the receptionist welcomed her with genuine courtesy the moment she stepped inside. Mr. Castellano is expecting you, she said with a warm smile. Naomi was escorted to the top floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city she had crossed every day without ever seeing from this height. Adrian stood beside a conference table instead of behind his large desk. The gesture immediately made the room feel less formal. Thank you for coming, he said. Naomi nodded. I said I would. Before either of them could continue, a middle-aged executive entered carrying several newspapers. His expression shifted the instant he noticed Naomi standing there. He set the papers on the table with unnecessary force. So the rumors are true, he said. You brought last night's surprise into the office. Adrian's calm expression never changed. Good morning, Daniel. Daniel barely acknowledged the greeting. His attention remained fixed on Naomi's simple blouse and inexpensive shoes. Forgive me, but I assumed your future wife would have experience representing this company at public events. The room fell completely silent. Naomi instinctively lowered her eyes, recognizing the familiar feeling of being judged before anyone knew her name. It was a feeling she had experienced countless times while cleaning luxury buildings where some people spoke through her instead of to her. Daniel continued without realizing the damage his words carried. Public image matters. Investors expect a certain level of. He hesitated, searching for a polite word that never came. Adrian quietly closed the newspaper in front of him. The soft sound echoed through the room. A certain level of what? He asked. Daniel cleared his throat. Presentation. Adrian looked toward Naomi before answering. Presentation begins with character, not clothing. Daniel attempted an uncomfortable smile. I only meant appearances influence perception. Adrian slowly walked toward the conference table. Exactly. And appearances almost convinced everyone at last night's reception that kindness belongs only to those wearing expensive suits. His voice remained calm, but every word carried quiet certainty. Naomi worked 2 jobs yesterday before stepping into a room where people with every possible advantage questioned whether she belonged. She answered every conversation with honesty and dignity. That is the kind of presentation I value. Daniel looked down without another argument. Adrian turned toward Naomi. I asked you to come here because I wanted you to hear something clearly. He placed a folder on the table. The restaurant manager called this morning. He feared last night's events might create problems for your employment. I assured him that no employee should ever be punished for helping someone in good faith. Your position is completely secure. Naomi stared at the folder without touching it. Relief quietly softened the worry she had carried since leaving the rooftop the previous evening. Adrian continued, there is one more thing. The Children's Hospital fundraiser is still looking for volunteers. They need people who know how to make families feel welcome during difficult moments. I thought of you immediately. Naomi looked up in surprise. You think I am qualified for that? Adrian smiled. After everything I witnessed yesterday, I cannot think of anyone more qualified. Outside the office windows, the city continued rushing through another ordinary morning. But inside the room, something extraordinary had happened. Respect had spoken more loudly than status. And for the first time in a very long while, Naomi realized that someone had looked beyond her uniform and seen her true worth. 3 months passed more quickly than either of them expected. Autumn painted Central Park in shades of gold and amber, and the Children's Hospital fundraiser had become one of the city's most successful community events. Naomi volunteered every weekend, greeting families with the same quiet kindness that had shaped her entire life. Parents remembered her name. Nurses smiled whenever she walked through the doors. Children who had arrived frightened often left her table laughing with small art projects tucked beneath their arms. Adrian attended every fundraiser without fail, although he always remained in the background, allowing the volunteers to receive the recognition they deserved. One Saturday afternoon, the hospital director stepped onto the small stage to thank everyone who had made the program possible. She spoke about generosity, compassion, and the power of ordinary people choosing to care for complete strangers. Then she invited Naomi forward. The applause filled the auditorium, and Naomi hesitated before walking onto the stage. She had spent most of her life trying not to be noticed. Standing beneath bright lights while hundreds of people applauded felt almost unreal. The director smiled warmly. Many people donate money, she said, but very few donate hope. Naomi has reminded every family who walks through these doors that dignity begins with being seen. The room fell into respectful silence. Adrian watched from the back, his hands folded quietly in front of him. Pride softened his expression, not because he had discovered Naomi, but because the world was finally seeing what he had recognized on the very first night. After the ceremony ended, families slowly gathered their belongings while volunteers cleaned the tables. Naomi stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air and found Adrian waiting near the hospital garden where bright chrysanthemums lined the stone walkway. He was holding a small white envelope instead of the leather folders or business documents she had grown accustomed to seeing in his hands. I have been carrying this for weeks, he admitted with a gentle smile. Naomi looked at him curiously. What is it? Something I should have said long ago. She opened the envelope and found a single photograph taken during the rooftop reception months earlier. In the picture, she was laughing without realizing anyone had been watching. Written beneath the photograph, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for reminding me that respect is earned through humility." Naomi looked up, her eyes quietly shining. I thought that night began because you needed my help. Adrian smiled. It did. He paused before continuing. But somewhere along the way, I realized I needed your example even more. They walked together through the peaceful garden without saying another word for several moments. Finally, Adrian stopped beside a maple tree whose leaves drifted gently across the path. He looked at Naomi with the same calm honesty that had first convinced her to trust him. Months ago, I asked you to play a role for one evening, he said softly. Today I am asking you something completely different. Naomi waited patiently, her heart beating just a little faster. Adrian took a slow breath and smiled. Would you allow me the chance to earn a place in your life, not through appearances or expectations, but one honest day at a time? Naomi answered with the warm smile that had quietly changed so many lives. Yes, she whispered. There were no cameras, no wealthy guests, no performance waiting to begin. Only two people standing beneath the autumn sky, choosing sincerity over status and kindness over pride. And on that quiet afternoon, everyone who truly knew their story understood that the greatest measure of power had never been influence or wealth. It had always been the courage to recognize another person's dignity before the rest of the world did.